Charles. I'm Thomas Wal.
Anthony,
Well, action and Liza Fernanda. I've received apology. The purpose of the meeting was to be in also library. On that, and we will program of the couple of out in the from the
for law enforcement. We have with us the director that's responsible for it, but importantly also we have some of the researchers here that we've said that we'll be answering the questions as part of our capacity building. So if you get our researchers responding, it's not because we do not wish to respond, it's more making sure that we're building capacity within our department. So that's why we have our colleagues here in the room. The process that we'll follow is a presentation, and then there will be questions that we'll take and recommendations that we'll take from the committee members. And Chair, even though the document's yet final in its title, it's not finalized yet until we finalize it with this committee, and then afterwards it will go to cabinet. So any inputs can still be incorporated into the document. It's just internal final part document that we have there. So Chair, I'll hand over immediately to Amanda to do the presentation, and then we'll take comments and questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, HOD. Just members, I have made a couple of amendments to the presentation that I'm going to be making today, but I will talk you through them anyway. And I'm going to hand over to Vicky Tully, who's going to take us through the introduction and methodology, and then I will come back and talk about the findings.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, we can commence now. So just at the very, very beginning, we would like to set the scene for the Policing Needs and Priorities report. As you know, Section 206 in the Constitution determines that the Minister of Police must, and the National Police Policy, they must consult with provincial government and take into account the policing needs and priorities. So this is a really, really important step and a duty as well from our side as Western Cape Government. We also must look as well at the Western Cape Community Safety Act too, where our MEC must report annually on this also. The findings must be considered and debated the way that we are having this engagement today, and obviously the recommendations, there needs to be uptake and use there as well. So this is a work in progress, as our HOD did say. We are getting there, but this engagement is a really important part of our obligation towards this piece of work as well. Just looking at the programme overall, the Policing Needs and Priorities programme, there are several objectives. The first being to influence the allocation, the distribution and utilisation of policing and safety resources that are identified that can address the safety concerns, determining the needs and priorities as mentioned, and making recommendations for decision makers. We need to publish the report, obviously, or none of this would make any sense at all. And finally, it's the distribution of the report to those who can use it. So the utilisation of the report is very important to us. We've listed there who they are, yourselves, the Cabinet, the Minister for Police, the National Secretariat for Safety and Security, the Provincial Police Commissioner, SAPS district and station commanders, most important, Metro Police, all provincial cluster and local community policing forums, our communities, our community policing forum chairpersons, the provincial government departments, district and local municipalities, and of course other interested community members as well. Just looking at this specific piece of work, because you know it's an annual report, so it changes slightly every year. You may be familiar with some of the previous iterations, but let's just focus on the one that is being considered today, the 2024-2025 report. So what we realised as our problem was that so many of the P&P reports prior focused almost solely on SAPS and SAPS resources. And then in the current environment that we're in, there's a growing need for policing at a local level. So we decided that because of the limited resources that are coming up for SAPS, we need to also focus on municipal law enforcement and metro police, which limited resources will of course be restricting their capacity also to provide comprehensive police services. So when you consider the contents of the research and the findings, please realise that these are the stakeholders and the participants that were interviewed for this as well. So the aim of this piece of work is to understand the mandates and the powers of the law enforcement agencies in the province, to also, most importantly, understand the nature and the number of resources allocated to them. So this is not just human resources, physical resources as well, and the challenges, the many challenges that they face in order to make meaningful and practical recommendations, so we can address these safety concerns going forward. To look a little bit on how we did this, our methodology. So it's a mixed method approach. So we did qualitative and quantitative. So we look at the numbers, but we've also looked at the stories behind the numbers, often missing in a lot of research these days. A questionnaire template was put together, developed, and we aimed to speak to the local municipalities, the 24 local municipalities in the Western Cape, including the city of Cape Town. 20 municipalities did respond. That included the City of Cape Town. The questionnaire was also sent to the Western Cape Mobility Department to collect data pertaining to provincial traffic law enforcement as well, a very important participant within this research. In addition, we had in-depth follow-up interviews conducted with participants to augment the data through the questionnaire. These were mainly with high-level stakeholders in the organisations that we mentioned above, in the entities above. The data then was analysed. We used some qualitative software called In Vivo. We were very excited. It was the first time we got to use this, and it worked out very well. The software helped us to capture the sentiment in a lot of the analysis, and then to integrate that with the quantitative data with the numbers as well. Furthermore, we did some desktop research. We looked at the relevant literature. We referred to many other P&P reports, many other articles out there. We looked at the SAPS policies. We also looked at the municipal safety plans, and we used the desktop research to augment the primary data. And the data that is considered, the range of data within this report that you will be seeing, is from the financial year 2018-19 running through to the end of 2023. There were limitations, as there always is with research. I think it's good to get these out first and just to say what we knew going into this. The project was undertaken in a relatively short period of time. The municipalities were requested to submit their completed questionnaires within a defined time frame, and additional information was sought later. Some of the data collected was inconsistent, and municipalities were not always able to answer questions for clarification. Obviously, because municipalities are different. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, some of them have more capacity, some of them do their budgeting slightly different as well. So we did note some of these, and we did the best to speak to them when these occasions arose. Some municipalities found it difficult to extract their expenditure on law enforcement and traffic services from their main budget. This is also a finding for us as well, because this is quite critical for the policing needs and priorities. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the interview schedule and request for information was not sent to SAPS, as the focus of this research was on municipal law enforcement. The SAPS did provide some information around HR in the province and a little bit about budget as well, but most of the information regarding SAPS was drawn from publicly available information or information previously submitted to POCs by SAPS. I'm just going to set the scene for the next section, Chairman, if that's okay. So the context of murder in the Western Cape, this is not going to be unfamiliar to the members in the room. The most recent annual crime statistics released by SAPS 2023-24. As you know, the objective of Western Cape government is to reduce murders by 50% over 10 years. In the year in question, there were 4,544 murders in the province. Sadly, an increase of 9.5% on the previous reporting year. 79% of these were in the City of Cape Town municipality and 21% were in the districts. Murder increased in all districts except for the Overberg, which had a decrease of 8.2%. The West Coast just increased by 1%. Colleagues, I'm going to pass it over to my director, Amanda Dissel, to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And just one further issue I want to raise in terms of the methodology is that once we had finalised this report, we did send it to the SAPS and to the City of Cape Town to comment on it. They commented on it generally favourably, and no any particular amendments were made or requested. So I don't think there was anything really we had to adjust in the actual report before we finalised it and sent it to you. So the initial part of the report outlines the mandate of the various entities, the SAPS, the Metro Police, the law enforcement and the traffic police. I haven't included that in the presentation, but you can have a look at that in detail, because that does help us to understand the implementation and the issues that we're dealing with afterwards. Obviously, the SAPS have the biggest mandate. They have the mandate of law enforcement, crime prevention, and investigation of crime. Metro Police have law enforcement and crime prevention. Law enforcement are only really mandated to law enforcement, and whereas traffic officers and the traffic police are restricted, as it were, to policing of traffic-related offences in terms of the legislation. In terms of budget and expenditure, also this is not in your version of the presentation, I included it, just to look at the SAPS national budget. So the SAPS have budgeting that happens at a national level, and part of it happens at the provincial level as well. At national level, the South African police budget has increased by 11.4% over the six-year period. In the Western Cape, their operational budget increased by 13%, and their operational expenditure also increased by 13%. So that's the operational. It doesn't include capital expenditure, and then there are also some personnel costs that I think are carried by the National Office. In the Cape Town Metro Police Department, we see that there's actually been a 34% increase up until 22-23. I didn't have the latest figures for that year for the Metro Police. So their budget is 772.5 million, which you can see is almost equivalent, just under the SAPS's Western Cape budget. And then the budget for the Western Cape Mobility Department, the traffic services, is 441.5 million. For the Metro Police, their budget includes the operational expenditure, capex, as well as their personnel costs. In terms of law enforcement, so we did ask the local municipalities for their traffic and law enforcement budgets. As Vicky has indicated, some of them had difficulty, or they weren't able to be clear to us what is the distinction between the law enforcement and the traffic services. So it was a bit difficult for us to analyse overall. But the City of Cape Town, with 64% of the population, obviously had the largest budget at 1.8 billion. Of the smaller municipalities, Stellenbosch was the largest with 103 million, and then the budgets of the other municipalities for law enforcement varied quite substantially to just 2.9 million at Cape Agulhas and 61 million in Drakenstein. So there's a big variance, and you'll see that also in the capacities in the different municipalities, there's an enormous variance. Safe to say that for most of the municipalities, their budget for law enforcement was raised as an area of concern. Just looking at the SAPS Western Cape staffing levels, and this has been a long time concern for this department and the Minister as well as this committee, is the shrinking SAPS personnel that are available. In the Western Cape, in 2023, the establishment was 21,080. But the actual personnel in office at that time was 19,270. Of that, 16,224 were SAPS Act police personnel. In actual words, those were the police officers. So this gives us a police to population ratio in the Western Cape of 1 to 429, which is higher than the national ratio. In other words, that we've got more population to fewer police officers. As you can see, the number of police officers has been increasing very slightly. It increased to the largest number in 2020 and then decreased again in 2023. We know that SAPS has now embarked on its 10,000 new member campaign, recruiting an additional number of members every year, a portion of which will be allocated to the Western Cape. So we should see the trend slightly reversing, if not remaining stable. In terms of the human resources available in the Metro Police and the Western Cape Mobility Department, the Metro Police had 576 personnel. They also have an additional 200 odd personnel who are in the management support services, but the 576 are the Metro Police officers on patrol. They have 449 vehicles, which gives us a police to vehicle ratio of 1 to 1.2, which is actually very healthy. And as you can see in the presentation, they are equipped with a diverse array of technological resources. So the Metro Police are very, very well equipped in the City of Cape Town. Two-way radios, they have the EPIC devices. The EPIC system, I'm not sure if the committee members are familiar with it. You are familiar with it?
No.
Oh, you're not familiar with it? Oh, it's a system that the City of Cape Town developed many years ago. I think it's more than 10 years ago, which has been an evolving system. It's a system to log calls and then to dispatch services according to where the need is. But it also enables them to monitor and to track service delivery, as well as issues that are raised with the community of the Cape Town. But all officers are equipped with these devices so that they can log all their progress. They also have monitors, televisions, computers, laptops, printers, and projectors. In the Western Cape Mobility Department, we have 627 staff members and 372 vehicles. They are servicing the whole of the province, mainly on the provincial highways, the national highways, and they are equipped with body-worn cameras. You see that also in the Western Cape Mobility Department. They have also been developing over a long period of time the enforced road safety management solution. And if you want to ask questions about this, our acting HOD will be able to answer questions about that. But it also enables pretty much the same kind of thing as EPIC. but it is a management and a data system. Then they have various technologies that they employ as well. Looking at the law enforcement posts, we had 3,004 law enforcement posts in the city of Cape Town and 476 in traffic services. So again, this is the largest number of law enforcement in the province. Obviously, as we have a population of 64 in the city of Cape Town, 64% of the Western Cape population is in the city of Cape Town. So the bulk of the law enforcement personnel are law enforcement officers and the learner law enforcement officers. As you know, also the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety supports the City of Cape Town with the LEAP project and pays for the deployment of law enforcement officers that are deployed in high priority areas. They're currently, at the time of writing the report, they were deployed in 13 areas, and we have now reduced that to 6 areas so that they can increase their footprint and focus on the areas which are the highest risk. All of the City of Cape Town services work closely with the SAPs in order to reduce murder, particularly in the Western Cape. And then in the municipalities, we looked at the law enforcement and traffic services. So we received input from 20 municipalities. We didn't receive any response from Beaufort West, Cederberg, Kannaland, and Matsitsikama. So in those 20 municipalities, there were a total of 434 law enforcement officers and 432 traffic officials. The highest number of law enforcement officers was in the Garden Route in Overberg, and the Garden Route and West Coast had the highest number of traffic officials. So this graph is really just a district level overview, although we do also give you the municipal breakdown in the actual report. Looking at law enforcement and traffic, traffic, the City of Cape Town, as I said, has got 64% of the population, and this is just totaling all the numbers together. And you can see the great number of city law enforcement officials compared to that of the district municipalities. The City of Cape Town vehicles and traffic and law enforcement. So law enforcement, they have 1,040 vehicles, and traffic, they have 690. So that gives them a ratio of 1.28 for law enforcement. And then their vehicles are 619 for the traffic services. At the district level, 182 vehicles were available to law enforcement across the districts. As you can see, that's quite a marked reduction. That's a ratio of 1.2, one vehicle to every 1.2 officers. A total of 223 vehicles were available to traffic services in the municipalities with a ratio of 1 to 1.93. So one of the ongoing complaints that we hear from the districts and the local municipalities that they don't have sufficient vehicles. There are large geographic areas that they have to cover, and that often they are not able to reach out to all the areas where there is a need. In the Garden Route, traffic services had the highest number with 86, followed by George with 31 and Mossel Bay at 24. And Cape Winelands had the highest number of vehicles with Stellenbosch at 25 and Breede Valley with 19. Just looking at the technological resources, I've already said that Cape Town is well equipped with a range of technologies. The Epic management system I've talked about already. This is the incident management system, the handheld devices. Then there's the ShotSpotter gunfire detection technology, which is in 4 areas at the moment, which enables the City of Cape Town to monitor shots that have been fired in those areas, and then they can mount a response in conjunction with the SAPs. They also have CCTV cameras in a number of areas and a camera response unit, which monitors incidences recorded on the cameras. This is managed from the Integrated Data Management Center in Goodwood. They also have the Eye in the Sky and several drones. And then, as I've also mentioned, the traffic, City of Cape Town traffic systems, they've got dash cams, they use the EPIC device, they've got speed equipment, the automatic number vehicle plate recognition, and various AI tools. So this is one of their big areas of emphasis in the City of Cape Town. In the municipalities, we see that there's obviously much less of an emphasis on technology. Not all of them are fully equipped. There were 15 drones at the time distributed across Stellenbosch, Drakensberg, Saldanha Bay, George, Overstrand, Mossel Bay, Swartland and Theewaterskloof. And some of them were using them quite effectively in the rural areas, particularly to monitor or track various incidences of crime. There was also limited CCTV cameras and technology, and the use was mainly in George, Overstrand and Theewaterskloof, but obviously confined to a smaller number of areas. Then radio systems, very few municipalities reported these. Berg River is developing has a control room using funds from the RCEP program. That's a provincial program to provide support to rural municipalities. Body cams were used in Stellenbosch and Mossel Bay, and also in traffic services, they were generally better equipped. Swartland was using drones, body cams in Berg River and Mossel Bay, and handheld devices most of them had. ANPR cameras were used in Swartland and Hessequa, and then they had all the other equipment. Most of them had radios, alcohol meters, speed measuring equipment. Some of them had crowd control shields, helmets, tonfas, pepper spray, handcuffs, and bulletproof vests. Then one of the issues was we wanted to see what is actually working well in terms of the integration between the law enforcement, traffic services, and the SAPs. In many of our policing needs and priorities workshops that we've held with all the stakeholders, one of the key questions has been is how do we deal with the limited capacity in the municipalities? And the key issue has been that there needs to be more of a focus on integration of services and collaboration in order to increase the capacity and footprint of service delivery. And this was indeed echoed again in our research findings, is that they said that this was one of the success factors, is that where there was integration and collaboration and working well together, then they had a much greater impact and they were able to reach further. There was an integrated approach with the SAPs, with law enforcement, also with the Western Cape Liquor Authority, also correctional services, and those all acted as a force multiplier. Also, there were partnerships existing with the Department of Home Affairs, Immigration, fire departments, Cape Nature, and also with neighbourhood watches and farm watches. Many of the municipalities had also engaged in training and supporting peace officers in order to support their law enforcement officers. This is one of the initiatives that's been supported by our department, is paying for local municipalities to train peace officers, which are then deployed in their municipalities as force multipliers. And then they spoke also of the importance of joint planning for operations. So where they do work together, they need to be part of a joint planning and then to implement that. Some of the municipalities also spoke about the successes of specialized units and how those were making an impact. In particular, the K9 units in Mossel Bay, Swartland and Overstrand. They were specializing on detection of the smuggling of drugs, some firearm-related crimes, but also marine poaching. And then also the Saldanha Bay Tactical Response Unit, which has 12 members. Some of the challenges that were raised by the municipalities, I think first and foremost was the budgetary constraints, and this was across the board and also obviously with the South African Police. The insufficient budgets in order to pay for the functions that they need. There's also a lack of capital funding over the years, which compounds the problem relating to operational planning, and these problems become more and more extensive as long as funding is withheld. There is a shortage of personnel, participants indicated that staff shortages make it difficult for them to cover all towns and to attend to all complaints to the satisfaction of the communities. And I think also given the geographic size of some of the municipalities and districts, you can see that this is a problem. The municipalities particularly indicated that there's a need for budget and more officers and vehicle, as well as budget to cover overtime. Lack of proper infrastructure and physical resources, lack of equipment, and shortage of vehicles was also a common concern. Again, with the vehicles, many of them indicated that the vehicles are overutilized, high mileage, and therefore they're not in proper working order, or this impacts negatively on the vehicle's lifespan. Matsitsikama, for example, indicated that they do not have personal protective equipment such as pepper spray, guns and stun guns, handcuffs and enough torches. So some of that very basic equipment for law enforcement officers is lacking as well. There's also a lack of specialized units, and there are technological challenges and a lack of clarification of roles and responsibilities. So most of the municipalities, although I spoke of the successes of these specialized units, this is obviously only limited to those 3 municipalities that I spoke of, but many of the other municipalities would also dearly like to have those specialized units. There's one of the projects that our department is also trying to assist municipalities with is to develop an integrated radio technology system in order to help with some of the technological challenges and the communication challenges. And then in the external environment, one of the frequent mentions was the problems of dealing with illegal taxi operations and taxi driver behavior. Our recommendations were to try and work with the municipalities to identify and to sufficiently fund them in order to expand their law enforcement and traffic capacity so that they could meet their needs. In terms of human resources, obviously we need to consider increasing the number of officers that are deployed. In terms of the deployment, we know that most crime takes place from Friday to early Monday mornings, and also mainly at night and weekends. But most of the local municipalities do not have a 24-hour service over 7 days a week. And so when the need is most urgent, they don't have the services to provide. We think the Western Cape government should play a role in supporting municipalities with the training of youth in communities to be deployed as peace officers. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we are recruiting and training the right caliber of personnel. We're not just recruiting the wrong people into the wrong positions. In terms of training, it's important to look at standardized training for law enforcement and traffic services. So there is they need to be standardized, and also their mandate needs to be standardized. We've also been talking about standardizing uniforms across the province so that municipal law enforcement officials are instantly recognizable. Physical resources, a suggestion was to develop a centralized procurement system to ensure that standardized equipment was procured and used, and also to look at the integration of communication system, which I've already mentioned. In terms of integration and collaboration, there's the IMPS, the IMPS, which stands for
Institute for Municipal Public Safety.
So this is a body which is helping to facilitate integration and strengthening of law enforcement services across the municipalities. And they have identified there that there's also a need to develop standard operating procedures for joint and integrated operations, as well as a need to share data and information across the different agencies, municipalities, and with the SAPs. In terms of accountability and oversight, so law enforcement and traffic officials, there is no statutory body in terms of the legislation that has oversight over law enforcement and traffic officials. The SAPs, there are many oversight bodies, including IPID, Parliament, the Western Cape Police Ombudsman, and so on. In the City of Cape Town, we have the Civilian Oversight Committee, which does have oversight over all City of Cape Town law enforcement, metro and traffic police, but there isn't such a thing in the local municipalities. So while these people are equipped and have got the mandate and ability to use force, there isn't a sufficient oversight over them. The IPID has no oversight powers over law enforcement officials. So one of the things that we need to do is to look at what kind of system of oversight and accountability can we have over law enforcement, given the constraints of the Constitution and legislation. And these oversight in particular needs to be over the use of force and the management and reporting of the use of firearms. We have, as you know, a huge problem in this regard in terms of the loss of firearms. Also, the issue of command and control, this needs to be enforced at all levels. And finally, we also think that there needs to be a standardized way of reporting on achievements. So individual municipalities include achievements in their reports, but it's not collated in any kind of centralized fashion. We need to continue to support, to develop and support specialized units, which seem to be playing a huge role in the success of municipal law enforcement. Also, just to add that some of those specialized units, the K9 units, do a lot of work with the SAPs and have added a lot to their capacity and impact. But we also think that there needs to be evidence-based assessments in order to indicate where they need support and where they need to be built. We need to focus also on building partnerships and collaboration with communities, especially with the municipal law enforcement. They work directly with the communities, and there must be much more engagement between them and the CPFs and the community safety structures. A regular engagement with the neighbourhood watches and farm watches in those rural areas, and also this there should be a requirement for them to report back on their successes and challenges to those forums as well. That's not required in legislation, but it should be a standard practice. And then we need to look at integrating existing technology in order to maximise impact and building on new technology where there isn't any. In conclusion, Chairperson, this report, we sought to map the extent and capacity of the metro policing and municipal law enforcement in the Western Cape and to identify the challenges they face in working with the police. We know that the SAPs will continue to be the major law enforcement service and provider in the Western Cape. They have the most extensive constitutional and legislative mandate, and they have a reach across the whole province. However, we see that there hasn't been an incremental increase in their numbers, and they don't have the strength to meet the need that is prevalent in the Western Cape. So in order to maximise their capacity, there is a need for them to work together with the Metro Police and the law enforcement that is available in the municipalities. So although there are many resources that are available, we think that there's still a lot of room for improvement and further development in order to ensure that all forms of policing and law enforcement can provide a professional, democratic and responsive service at all levels. It is important to maintain the resources we have built in the face of budget cuts. And finally, just to say, the Western Cape government remains committed to supporting the efforts of policing at the provincial level as well as at local government in order to combat crime and to assist in addressing many of the challenges that are facing the communities. Thank you.
Any additions?
No, nothing from my side. Thanks, Chair.
Any other additions? Right, so over to the committee members. Questions? Member Van Manen.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of questions. Do you want me to limit myself to an initial round and then come back?
Our colleagues, let's do the same that we did in the past. Initial round, around 5 minutes per member, and then depending on how the conversation goes, we can do a second round. Right. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to start with the methodology. So as I understand it, this was mainly, well, not mainly, this was directed to municipal PNPs. I'm concerned that it doesn't give us a complete picture at all because it largely does not include SAPs. I want to know how one is going to process this information without that, because, I mean, it is very uneven, as has been said. Cape Town is 64% of the province. One then has the rest of the province at 36%, but there were 4 municipalities, Beaufort West, Tsitsikamma, Cederberg and Kannaland, that didn't respond. Now, geographically, that's quite big. So what I want to know is, how will those municipalities be communicated with? Why do they not respond? Do you have any insight into that? And are there any ramifications for not responding? And I'm thinking particularly of the Community Safety Act. I think it's deeply problematic when one has large areas like like Beaufort West not coming forward, because it starts getting very difficult to talk about integration when one simply isn't knowing what's going on in those jurisdictions, particularly as one has big national roads running through there. Then in terms of the municipalities who do respond, who exactly is responding and what is the integrity of that information? Is one able to make assumptions that the information is solid information? Is it just a box-ticking exercise? So how good is the information that you are receiving? If we're looking at intelligence-driven policing, it starts with understanding who's filling in these documents and responding to these questions, so one can actually trust what one has in front of you. Then Ms. Tully was talking about in slide 2, and this goes back to my concerns about SAPS not being particularly involved with this PNP, that one of the objectives is to influence the allocation, distribution and utilization of policing and safety resources in line with identified policing needs and priorities and safety concerns. Now that makes sense if one's looking at how SAPS or Provincial Mobility is going to be deploying boots on the ground. But it doesn't really speak to the issue of various municipalities in different jurisdictions. We've also heard how there isn't a standard, essentially standard training, standard identification. There's issues with working together. So how is that particular objective achieved by doing what is in essence a survey of staff numbers and equipment that can't be deployed? I mean, there are a certain amount of soft border options, that is true, but you can't wholesale deploy municipal employees from jurisdiction A to jurisdiction B. So that is a concern of mine. Obviously, the issue of the understaffing with SAPS is an ongoing issue that I think we are really going to need to unpack at some point in quite a big way. Also, some of the information from SAPS was coming from 2018, 2019. Now, that is not only 5-6 years ago, but it's also pre-COVID. So I'm concerned about the integrity of that information and the value of it. So I think that is 4 minutes, Chair. It's the issue on the methodology. Let's just unpack that first, and then I can come back in a further round with the issues on the key findings. Thank you.
Any other questions? I see, well, let's go down the row. I saw Member Boyson, Member Stevens, Member Kasim, then Member Wessels, Member Kwensu. So, Member Boyson.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, mine are just a couple of comments. It would probably need some comments as well. Chairperson, just to start off, the signing of the memorandum last year was a big thing. It was a great thing. And I would propose, Chairperson, that we as this committee, if we can have insight to the content of that MOU, because, everything sounds metro-based. We understand that, but we're also from rural areas. So I'd like to see whether that MOU, might have, some tentacles to the rural areas as well. And then if not, then probably one has to engage on how can that be spread to the rural areas. And then there were also comments made on specialized units. And the first thing that comes to mind is K9 units. We know that Mossel Bay has got a K9 unit, etc., etc. Now, in the absence of some municipalities not having a K9 unit, one would then have to rely on SAPS K9 unit. And I'm from Beto, so Knysna municipality and Beto municipality do not have K9 units. And my question would then be to the department, because I also suspect that Knysna SAPS K9 unit is defunct if it's not closed. I hardly see any activity there. You don't hear dogs barking. You don't even see warm bodies. And the last time there were issues on feeding for the dogs when the unit was still semi-operational. So I would like the department just to have a follow-up on that to see whether that canine unit can then service Knysna and Beto and the Satchfield areas all the way up to George. And then also on the matter of drones, again, the presentation alluded to drones being given to B municipalities. I'm also aware, Chairperson, that the district municipalities were also given drones, a drone per district municipality. So if we can then also, Chairperson, have a follow-up in terms of how are those drones being effectively cooperated in terms of collaborating with the B municipalities? Because when we received those drones as districts, each district had a drone, the 5 districts. And one of the issues that came up is the drone pilots. Drone pilots needs to be trained and they need to be licensed. And districts were grappling with that in terms of how do we kick off the training of drone pilots, and if not, how can they be assisted? And if they do have the pilots and if the drones are operational, what is the collaboration with the B municipalities and with SAPS in that regard? And then lastly, Chairperson, Ms. Dissel referred to there is no oversight body on the law enforcement of municipalities, etc. Again, a follow-up that the department can do is that at SALGA level, RTMC, Road Traffic Management Corporation, they had this on their agenda. They wanted that to be finalized. But the last time I checked, Chairperson, and again, it's something that needs some follow-up, they could not, at SALGA level, national level, they could not agree with the city of Cape Town. All the other metros, as usual, they toe the line if something comes from either Luthuli House or wherever. The city of Cape Town did not agree on the methodology that RTMC wanted to enforce. And one of the issues there, they disagreed on rank. There was a problem with rank and training because at municipal level, Chairperson, some trainings takes 2 years and some in-service training. And at other levels, traffic level, it is a full 4 years or a full whatever, so they could never agree on rank, you know, and a man in uniform at municipal level arrives on the scene, there's a provincial law enforcement arriving on the scene, and who's senior and who takes over, they could never agree on that. So maybe if the department can also just look into that, because that have hampered the oversight over what we're dealing with. Thank you, Chair.
Member Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I've also got quite a few questions, but some was covered by my colleagues. My first question I want to ask is, what is the current police population ratio in high crime areas like the Cape Flats? And how does it compare to the national average? And then what measures are being taken to address the shortage of SAPS officers in the Western Cape? And how many newly trained officers have been deployed to the province in the past year? And then gang violence, organized crime. What specific interventions are in place to combat the gang-related violence and extortion in our communities? Especially what we see in the past 2 weeks. How many youngsters were killed? 2 weeks ago, 17 youngsters were killed over one weekend. And I don't even want to talk about this weekend, about the 4-year-old that was shot in the house. And that same family lost a 12-year-old a year ago. And to me, it's like, how successful have our anti-gang units in intelligence-led operations been in dismantling organized crime networks, especially in the metro? That's all for now.
Member Kasim.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I want to start on slide 4 in terms of the limited resources that were highlighted for SAPS and law enforcement, among others. I just want to check, since law enforcement in this province is the brainchild of the Premier, Chairperson, why is the province not providing adequate resources for law enforcement for the purposes of combating crime? And then also on slide 8, Chairperson, regarding the murder rate in the Western Cape, is the objective to reduce the murder rate by 50% over the next 10 years still feasible in this province, taking into account the information that is presented here when we look at the murder rate that is constantly increasing along with the reduction in the resources? Chairperson, in terms of the 4 municipalities who did not respond to the questionnaire and the templates that was in terms of data that needed to be collected, what was the reasons and who are those municipalities? Because it can't be that the whole municipality failed to give simple information like that in terms of the budget. And then also I'm struggling to understand how exactly did they find it difficult to extract that expenditure? So who exactly are those 4 municipalities that this presentation relates to or speaks about? And then in terms of law enforcement, Chairperson, I got some questions from law enforcement. And these are questions that I think a lot of them are asking, and I just needed some clarity. Why are the salary scales not being aligned for those in law enforcement, even after the RPL qualifications are completed, that are obviously expected for them to complete in order to get the same powers as those in traffic, among others? And then also top management, Chairperson, I know and I've heard that the salary scales have already been aligned for them. But why has it not been aligned for the ground forces, which are those who, law enforcement who are currently on the ground? Thank you.
Member Wessels.
Oh, Wessels. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Chairperson. Chairperson, firstly, maybe a comment on what Member Boyson said, and I think unequivocally I want to state that this report shows the clear difference between Cape Town and the rest of the Western Cape. What we see here is a total lack of resources in the rest of the Western Cape. We talk about 20 other municipalities with 400 staff members in law enforcement, and if we take the top 2 of those municipalities away, then it leaves 200 odd law enforcement officers between 18 municipalities, covering most of the Western Cape in terms of geographical distance. If we look at the Central Karoo, Beaufort West is one of the key gateways into the Western Cape. They don't even provide the numbers, firstly, but then the second point is the whole Central Karoo region is talking about I think they've got 2 vehicles that they reported on, or vehicles that they've reported on, as well as 2 and 5 staff members, which is that is quite scary, considering that is one of the main gateways into the Western Cape. I think secondly, the detail that I don't see in here, and I'm not sure whether this sits with this department necessarily, but is in terms of traffic income that is budgeted by municipalities, what is the percentage of average collections that these departments, being so understaffed, is actually collecting? Because if we, so I come from George municipality, so I know roughly the amount that is written off by local municipalities, and maybe one must start there and maybe look at some of the organograms and the key performance indicators within these departments, because that can actually be a revenue generator to subsequently increase capacity in the department. Then also, I see the number of people that's working there, but what I also would like to find out is what is the percentage of the municipalities of the other 20 that actually does have a 24/7 type of response, and if so, what is it that they, how do they do it? Because I also don't see them really with the equipment that they've reported on being able to to do anything during that sort of time? And then, is there a underlying percentage or sort of a comparison? I'm not exactly sure. 1 to X amount of residents in a town that law enforcement should be staffed at? Is it one law enforcement per 15,000 residents, or whatever the case may be? And then, does the organograms of these municipalities actually cater for that? And what is the vacancy rate of those organograms? Because I think that would also be very, very interesting. Yeah, I think that's it for me now. Thanks, Chair.
Member Quincy.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I think let me start off by welcoming the research report. Let me do that and commend the team for embarking on that study. I will attempt to engage with your research report, but due to time, I may not cover all the ground. When you look at your study, it starts off by giving an impression that you are undertaking a comparative study. A comparative study between the South African police services and municipalities, and importantly, the city of Cape Town. Right? That's the first impression it gives you, but later you begin to appreciate that, no, actually here you are focusing on municipalities. Now, your approach in terms of giving the state of SAPS and the approach you use is quite fascinating. You know, be it staff complement, challenges, etc., etc. That for me is quite impressive. You know, after learning that, actually you're going to dive into municipalities. I thought that perhaps you're going to use a similar approach, you know, so that one can have a sense. But unfortunately, that could not happen. But I think it's important to pose this question before I forget about it. What is it that you believe that is unique about this study? One is to be interested to understand that it was never found anywhere, and it emerges out of your research as a basis to inform the priorities of the provincial and national government. You know, one is to be interested on that particular aspect, because in the study, I make a very important point where you indicated that previous studies focused on South African police services, and you make a statement about challenges and constraints, but you are not elevating them as to what were those challenges and constraints beyond what is on the surface. You know, I see that as a gap. Now, again, the study was conducted last year. In the same period the study was conducted, there were some developments, and such developments include, key among others, the cooperation agreement in the context of the city of Cape Town, right? And that is not embedded in the study. You don't find it. You don't find it, and no attempts are made to locate the study within the context of that, unless you convince me otherwise. Now, you talk about integration of resources and so on. Don't you think that should you have had, or let me take this maybe perhaps as a gap also, that maybe given that you know the state of municipalities in terms of resources and so on, don't one perhaps expected that an attempt would be made to reconcile the resources and say, given the resource distribution, either the metro or anywhere else, you just oppose that with subs and say, as in your recommendations part of the integration of resources, what would that mean if these resources were to be integrated? As all one talk about the integration. Now you know the resource capacity of municipalities except the 4, right? But you're unable to tell us in Matsigama, oh, okay, in Pito, that municipalities have this capacity and subs has this combined. This is what these institutions or law enforcement agencies will bring about and contribute in this, or they are giving us 100% or 99% in terms of resources. So that is missing in the study. And that's one will ask the question and listen, and then so what? As you listen, as you was reporting, asking, so what? So I think that point is, I think, is missing. And another aspect, it appears, I might have misread it, because when you read the document, you ought to revisit it, that it appears that there is more funding for traffic than law enforcement. You may have to confirming that. If that's the case, why there is such, and what is the rationale behind that? To what extent is this helping us in this instance in the fight against crime? Shouldn't we perhaps consider a review and integrate? Because I like your study because you integrated all law enforcement agencies, including those belonging to mobility. And in the course of investigation, you even pose question to mobility in the context of the area of your area of interest. Because in Beaufort West, the area, Beaufort West has what? Has N1, has R61. So that for me is the area of interest. There's another issue which you are raising, and this is quite important. The issue of gunshot detection, right? And the issue of number plates, drones, and so on. Nowhere in your study because the value of this investment ought to be elevated. Nowhere in your study where you talk about the success rate of the technologies. In this respect, gunshot detection, number plate recognition, and drones. Nowhere in your study where you are elevating this question that there are recognizable breakthroughs or successes as a result of this and this and that, and therefore we should expand investment in this terrain. Nowhere, and I think for me, you may need to clarify that, and areas, you just oppose this deployment with the crime stats, with crime reports. You just oppose that. Given that we deploy, right, is there reduction or what have you? Now, a statement is made here that police members and more resources as kidneys for the province. The notion of boots on the ground. I want to challenge the research team that I do not believe, Kasim, that boots on the ground are a panado to respond to the rate of crime in the province. Why am I making this point? I'm making this point simply because areas where there is high crime rate across, all of them are met with escalation of what? Of squatter camps. Which for me, it is when we're to address the chronic crisis of underdevelopment in working class communities that you can be able to respond to the question of, and this question is not elevated in the study. And the involvement of other departments, in this instance, your human settlement, etc., to address this question. And across where there is high crime rate and murder rate is areas where there are massive squatter camps. Not talk about this question. One is deeply interested. What is your view? What is your take on this question? On the argument I'm advancing, that boots on the ground are not a panacea to respond to the crisis of crime, right? So, and that crime is...
We'll do a second round.
Okay, the last point.
We can just wrap up on that one.
Okay.
We'll come back for a second round.
Okay, the last point then on this first round. This point I think was raised somewhere. I think it's your what? The issue of oversight over municipalities. And you make a very good point that on the city of Cape Town, where it has a body responsible for oversight, as SAPS is who oversees IPIT, responsible for SAPS. Now, in 2020, after the incident of, I forgot that chap from Kailicha, who was put out of his house by the city of Cape Town law enforcement agencies, and the debate, therefore, now, that for me, how do you see the capacity of CIVOC, given the study also conducted by the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, CSVR? Don't you think that a legislation should be put in place or amended to expand the range of IPID to cover municipalities in this instance? Given the state, maybe you'll advise about the state of CIVOC and the capacity of that to investigate properly and to play an oversight role on the municipality, particularly the city of Cape Town and Pure. And you're making a point, it's a parting shot, that the province's constitutional mandate extends to oversight over municipalities. Do you suggest, therefore, that we can summon the city of, or any organ belonging to municipalities in the space of law enforcement? Thank you very much.
And then just a couple of points from my side as well. And I think some of the members touch on it as well. What I'm missing, and I think a couple of members actually referred to the same thing. For us to be able to engage meaningfully with a report like this, and is very useful. Don't see it as call it us regarding this as not useful. It's actually it's fulfilling the purpose of a report, that it makes our minds work, in terms of what's missing and what should be there. I miss member Wessels referred to raw figures, call it ratios, population, in terms of the number of police officers, budgetary ratios in terms of the need, a breakdown of the different kind of crime priorities per municipality. I think a couple of ratios would be very useful for us there. I think a breakdown, there's different mandates, of course, for police, for the SAPS and the various levels of government there, but a breakdown between these three levels, that we can actually do a comparison. Now, yes, of course, there's a particular scope of this research report. It's focused on municipality, but for us to be meaningfully able to give inputs and recommendations, I think that comparative backdrop will be very useful. And I'm not going to further elaborate. I think the point was well covered. But most definitely, I see a number of areas here that belong in the space of the Memorandum of Understanding. For starters, it was only signed with the City of Cape Town. It's not clear to us as a committee at this stage exactly what are the areas that are being explored, what type of relationships are being built, how it affects specialized units, how it affects the very kind of collaboration that you are referring to that's required, how municipalities should be reporting back to you. I think it is deeply problematic if some municipalities communicate with you as an afterthought. I suspect a lot of what we say is based on the quality of feedback that you got. One of the reasons possibly why it's very Cape Town focused in many respects. So I think there is a brainstorm required in terms of how we can integrate research like this, the data we glean from this, how we link it to the Memorandum of Understanding, how we link it to the gaps that are clearly there. And I like the idea, incidentally, that the inspectorate, that there's also an element there, because it does affect police law enforcement. If something happens in the SAPS, well, frankly, whether you're working at a municipal level or working in the SAPS, you're going to have a problem with your community. So I like that particular aspect of it. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea that they should be the oversight bodies in municipalities. That sounds a little bit like centralization to me. But the principle of oversight that your support also supports, and certainly collaboration, and certainly they call it the interlinkages there, I think is something that we should be exploring. And I think, colleagues, I do think we have there's a couple of recommendations that we touched on in our inputs as well that I want to pivot back to. If I'm going to be saying, well, I'm actually going to be in committee recommendation space. But if you can respond to the questions, and then I'm going to give another round of engagement there. Yes, at the end of the day, one thing you will pick up is that this is a committee that are interested, and maybe I can summarize my input like this: outcomes, not outputs. Providing equipment to me is an output. What impact that equipment has is an outcome, and I'm a very outcomes-based person myself. I think that should also be part of reporting, tracking impact. And yes, the rest is for recommendations in the committee. Over to you.
Chairperson, so many high-grade questions, but we'll attempt to respond them as competently as possible. Chair, can I start with the scope of the audit? And the last member has really driven into the core of the scope. So the scope was to do an as-is analysis of what's the state of the capabilities and capacities within the municipalities. So we have not done the evaluation, and the point was made, have we done an evaluation of the effectiveness of certain technologies of the K9 unit? I think that we've not drilled down into that space, because the scope would have expanded. Your point about the context, though, that's so critical. I suppose we need to bring in the context in terms of the crime stats, because now you can see the capacitation of the municipalities versus the capacity versus the stats, and whether they're able to address. So I think that, and that stats that's immediately available. You would understand that evaluating the effectiveness of certain technologies, and it takes a different context. So the next phase will be to look at that evaluation on what it is what you want to do. So, and I'm starting with the points on the study specifically. So what it is that we believe is unique about this study, and that is something that I've checked. And the one thing is the poor coordination and the management of municipal enforcement that's supposed to strengthen our perimeter. And the mention was mentioned about gateway municipalities. It's the poor management and the poor capacitation of those municipalities. Take it the Betos, who's one of our gateway, and the Machikamas, and the Beaufort West. And that it's been neglected for quite some time, and also it's been left for municipalities to determine what they're going to put in there, because there was a question, why law enforcement focus on traffic and not law enforcement? But the one key insight that I've also found is the missing, and I'm speaking to Member Wessels' point, the missing of an opportunity to generate revenue, to become self-sustainable in these spaces. And the point was made why we're not doing it, but that is something that I've picked up. For example, Prince Albert, they can police a certain part of the N1, but they're not utilizing the opportunities or the roads that are coming to them in order to increase the capacity and become more self-sustainable. And that's perhaps where we need to look at. So the point was made that this study does not address the collaboration agreement. In a sense, we need to refer back to the collaboration agreement, but we've looked at the capacity of these municipalities as is. But the question was also asked as to whether the collaboration agreement extend beyond the City of Cape Town. The collaboration is called the Safer City Collaboration Agreement, so it's city focused. But we have also, SAPS has indicated that they want similar agreements with the various districts. So it will be expanded with the different districts. On page 30 of the report, that was what was in. We do have, we have the total law enforcement posts, the total traffic services posts, total metro police. However, we do not have the total SAPs, and we've asked for the total selection so that we can see if we juxtapose all those resources, what is it that we sort. So that is perhaps another column that we can add this. So looking at in those specific municipalities, how many SAPs resources are deployed there, and then we can look at how do we address it. So we did not cover the so what, how will it impact? So that impact is, that will be a different study that we need to look at. And the elevating the SAPs, the challenges in SAPs, where you've indicated the gap, and we note that specific point. And you have indicated that there's more funding for traffic than for municipal law enforcement. I think that is historical. We've always had traffic police in the municipalities. The normal municipal law enforcement is something that came at a later stage and is growing. So in some municipalities, they take it more serious. In some municipalities, it's a bit of a challenge where, and I can just think of Beaufort where it's not a high priority, and yet we need those resources in. So I've covered the issue of the gunshot detection and the technology and the value of that. That is an important point, and we need to take that into account pretty quickly, because we are due to start with the drafting of the Western Cape Safety Act, and that's where these technologies, understanding the value of the new technologies, need to come in. Your point on boots on the ground, that is not the panacea to crime. So, and I agree with you. It cannot just be about boots on the ground. It needs to be the whole culture. So it needs to be the whole of government working together to address the socio-economic issues also. So when we look at our provincial strategic plan and look at all of the elements, and also the safety chapter in the provincial safety plan, we speak about, firstly, jobs for growth, which is the key focus area, growing the economy, making sure that we can get most of our people into jobs. But then there's also the safety chapter that speaks to violence prevention firstly, and then it speaks to the whole issue of community, in strengthening community structures, making sure that we capacitate our communities, and then thirdly is our law enforcement. So law enforcement shouldn't be your first line of defense. You need to focus on the other two first. So I agree entirely, and that is where this whole of government approach and what we're trying to do is bring everything together and understanding that boots on the ground does not solve the problem. You can have a policeman on each street of each corner of the street. It doesn't mean that we will be able to reduce crime specifically. Oversight over municipalities, I don't think we have oversight over municipal law enforcement at this stage. So that's not there yet. But we envisage to build that into the Western Cape Community Safety Act that we want to review, so that we can have oversight, because currently there's no oversight, and this standing committee cannot call them to this committee room at this stage. But I'm hoping that with the new act, and that we'll be able to build that in. So I just want to go through some. I will ask Amanda to deal with some of the other matters. I just want to focus on those things that within my space, can I leave the methodology to you? The lack of standards amongst municipalities that needs to be addressed. And that is, I'm coming to Member van Minne's point, the lack of standards amongst municipalities, and how will that be addressed? And deployment across jurisdictions. So Amanda has spoken about the Institute of Municipal Public Safety. We have that interventions twice a year where we engage the different municipalities, and we have some political principles. Also, some mayors attend those specific sessions, and we also have SALGA. And what we have agreed to is to look at how do we start standardizing the law enforcement across, and also links to the point that was made about the difference in the rank and the training and the differences in those. So we are addressing that, and the idea is to standardize the ranks, the titles, and then also look at whether a person that lives in Saldanha, or an official officer that works in Saldanha, if he crosses the border into Bergerrivier, for example, whilst on duty, that he can, because in the same district, that they can start enforcing the law in those specific areas. So it's currently they can't, so we need to look at where do we structure the competence at the district municipality or the local municipality, and that also brings some contestation. I suppose even at a political level, it will bring some contestation. But we are discussing those because we need to get that sorted, the whole issue of the jurisdiction. So, Member Boyson, the MOU does not cover rural areas. There will be, for each district, there will be an MOU, and that we've engaged with SAPS. The Canaan units, can I leave that to you, Amanda? Drones issued to each district. Once again, the issue, you've asked for an update on that, so I'm not going to give you a full briefing on that. I think we owe you an update on the utilization of the drones and the collaboration with the B municipalities, and then also the issue of the drone pilot. We'll come back. You've asked for the oversight body and the law enforcement, that I have just covered also. Challenges with the rank and the training, and that they could not agree. They can still not agree. But what we have in that room is we have the City of Cape Town in the room when the IM session, and we also have SAPS in the room. So we're all discussing how we're going to standardize on those things, and we will be driving, coordinating that from a provincial perspective. Because if they're not going to agree, we're going to have to help, and we're going to have to bring things together. Member Vessels, the report status, I'll leave that to. Okay, so the percentage income being collected, I think I've covered that, and I've covered the point that of the revenue generating opportunities. I do think it's a huge gap at the moment. We need to look at that. And then ECI deal ratio for law enforcement for 1,000 people. I'll leave that to you, Amanda, if you can cover that. Well, what are the current stats of the population? And to our police, I said on page 28 of the report, we do have that for the high-risk areas. So remember, it's in the actual report on page 28. Training to new officers, gang-related violence responses. Amanda, if you can cover that. Member Kasim, the law enforcement, why do we not use the law enforcement to combat crime? According to the Act, we're not combating crime is SAPS's responsibility. You will see that also in the report. We've covered that in the report in terms of the different responsibilities. The murder rate of 50%, is it feasible? So the murder rate of 50%, it can be argued, Chairperson, that it's not feasible. But what we are saying is, we only want 2,200 people to die per year. And it's still a lot. So feasible or not, it's a target that we work towards, and even 2,200 people being killed every year. So currently we're at 4,500, as the stats indicated. So we're setting that target there in terms of what it should be. So even if we bring it down by 5% or 10%, that is what we need to strive for. We actually want to reduce it by 90 to 100%, but we know that's not going to be possible within the next 5 to 10 years. But that is an aspirational target. But if you look at it, we say we only need 2,500 people to die, meaning 200 people per month. It's okay if 200 people per month die, which is not acceptable. So and the 4 municipalities, Amanda, you're gonna cover that, and the color The qualification salaries are not aligned for officers on the ground. Member Kasim, that is, as I said, indicated, that's something, it's a very thorny issue, and it's something that we are addressing in the collaboration with IMPS, and Salga is also working with us to get that sorted. Member Stevens, I've covered the training to the new officers. You will cover that. I'll just need to see whether I've covered most. Okay, Amanda, if you can cover the other matters for us, specifically as it pertains to the methodology and those questions that.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the very detailed questions. We do appreciate your engagement with the report. So this report, in all of our previous PNP reports, we've had a very in-depth look in terms of what is the needs, what are the challenges faced by the South African police, what are they doing, what are their policies, what are their strengths, etc. And their numbers. We've done very in-depth report into that. Our 2023-24 PNP report also included a detailed analysis of the needs in each district municipalities. So we didn't want to revisit that and do that, because we've been finding that we don't want to just rehash the same report. So this is why we chose to take one of the thematic areas that had been identified in the PNP reports and to try and do more of an in-depth look at that. We acknowledge that this report is largely descriptive. It is a starting point for us to go further and to try and understand it. But I think that in terms of what are the unique contributions of this report, I don't think that there is anything else which collates this information in this way. So I think it gives us a very good starting point, and sure, we can strengthen a lot of the way it's presented and analysed and so on. And I think that we certainly will look at that. In terms of the time frame for the data, so we started collecting data for this towards the end of 2023, and then we finalized the write-up and the report for 2024. So the data that we choose for the analysis is usually in the 2022 or 2022, 23, 24 year. So in June, by the time of June that we finalized the report, the cooperation agreement had not yet been entered into. So we try and maintain the integrity of the time frame in the report, and to make it consistent with the data that we are collecting at a particular point in time. Member van Meulen made the comment about the SAPS data going back to 2018-19. That is just to where we looked at the increase or decrease. We were trying to look at trends over time from that time to the latest point, which was in 2022, 23, 24. So we were looking at the trends over time for that. In terms of the municipalities who didn't respond, I just would like to ask my colleague who's online if he could just respond to that, and also how they engaged with the municipalities and did follow up. Kumbalani, can you just respond to that question?
Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, members, the chairperson and honorable members, and our HODs and other senior officials from the department. Just to respond on the issue of the 4 municipalities that did not respond, what I wanted to explain was that we had a 3-phase data collection process. The first phase started when we started by requesting information on law enforcement across all the 24 municipalities and the city of Cape Town. But we then realized that that information was not going to be sufficient to give us a clear picture of the resources and capacity of the law enforcement agencies in those municipalities, because there was also traffic services that are also playing a very important role in keeping our roads safe and also building safer communities. So we then requested, we then had a second round of requesting information by requesting information on traffic law enforcement. So that was the second phase of our data collection. But what I wanted to explain about the first phase of data collection when we requested information for law enforcement is that all the municipalities, including including Beaufort West, Cedarburg, Canaland, and Matikama participated. It was only when we were requesting information on traffic law enforcement that the 4 municipalities did not participate. However, because we also conducted follow-up interviews with people who submitted information to us, we set up interviews for with the people that submitted information to us, and 2 of the 4 municipalities that did not participate when we collected data on the for traffic law enforcement, they are 2 of the 4 municipalities participated, and those municipalities was Canaland and Matsikama. And we conducted those interviews, follow-up interviews with people who submitted information to us so that we could augment the primary data that we submitted, the primary data that we collected. And then if I can also respond on the issue of the people who responded to our request for information and what they submitted. In the main, the people who have submitted information to us when we requested the information were people like the directors or acting directors of community services from the municipalities, the heads of protection services, the heads of law enforcement, and the heads of traffic services, amongst other people. So those were people who are senior in my understanding from the municipalities, and even the information that we received from other officials who were not the directors and head of protection services, were of the view that that information that they submitted to us was the information that was quality checked before it was submitted to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kumbulani. Then just to go on to some of the other issues, in terms of the effectiveness of the drones and the technology, I think this is an area that needs further study, and this is obviously beyond the scope of this particular report. But when we are looking, for example, even at the impact of boots on the ground, all of these are issues or strategies that we need to do evidence-based research on. We need to see what is the impact of these technologies, because we would also hesitate to say that municipalities and even the police should continue to invest heavily in technology if it is not producing the results that is required. Just on the issue of the revenue collection. So I only know from the city of Cape Town, this is really sort of anecdotal knowledge, is that the city of Cape Town issues a huge number of law enforcement fines. This is beyond the traffic, but only a tiny percentage of those are collected. So one of the queries is the issuing of fines an effective law enforcement strategy for municipalities when they are not able to collect the revenue or to collect the fines that are issued. And obviously, if the fines are collected, then that money would be available to support the municipalities in their endeavours. Member Stevens asked about the numbers of SAPs and the recruits. So the latest number we have for the Western Cape is that there were 16,424 SAPs police officers in 2024. And I've given you a breakdown of just the top 10 police stations, how they are staffed. So I think that because there is an overall understaffing of the SAPs in the Western Cape, we do find that there's understaffing in many of the police stations, and particularly in some of the most crime-afflicted police stations, there is a higher population to police ratio than there should be. So Gugulethu was 1 to 874, for example, which is one of the highest in the Western Cape. And Gugulethu is one of our highest murder stations. So these are many of the problems that we have expressed many times with the SAPs about how they allocate human resources. And it really does need to be allocated equitably and according to where the needs are most. In terms of measures to combat gang violence, if I could just, there are many, many measures, and I'm not going to talk specifically about the SAPS measures, but we do participate with the South African Police Service and most of the Western Cape government departments, relevant Western Cape government departments, the City of Cape Town, on a provincial joint anti-gang structure, where we are working together to try and address gang violence from a preventative point of view, particularly, and especially by focusing on youth at risk. Heidi can speak about this a bit later if you would like to go into more detail. I think that, the disparity between the City of Cape Town and the Metro law enforcement capacity, obviously, I think that's an issue that is driven by budget and resources in the district municipalities, the B&A municipalities. Across all 5 rural districts, there were 434 law enforcement personnel. What percentage of municipalities have a 24/7 deployment? Most of the rural municipalities did not have a 24/7 deployment. Although some of them indicated that they do have some capacity, some standby capacity. So it was quite difficult for us to indicate what specifically, who said that they could not do weekends at all. I think we have a table here on page so on page 48, we have all the law enforcement officers are deployed during office hours, 19 say including after hours, 21 there is some capacity on weekends, and only 1 said 24-hour service, and that's the City of Cape Town. So most of the others had a standby or a rotational service that was available when required. What is the optimum ratio of law enforcement to police population? Now, we haven't done, you can see also in the table that it's extremely low. We didn't do the ratio calculation, but the ratio is obviously so minimal that it doesn't even make proper calculations. As far as I know, there isn't an optimal ratio for law enforcement. I think that law enforcement is a really an understudied area. And in policing more generally, there's a lot of information and resources and studies that have looked at what are the optimal number of police per population. And even then, there is a lot of disagreement between how many police would be an optimal number for the population. I think the UN at some point said 1 to 250, and we are double that. But there's also been studies that said that is not really a proper measurement. It's very difficult to determine what is an optimal number. So I think that we can say that we can see that there is clearly insufficient law enforcement. But I think at the same time, we also need to look at what is the impact of the law enforcement officers we have, and then how can we strengthen that impact as well. Okay, so we didn't do the comparison between the SAPs and the law enforcement resources, bearing in mind also that SAPs have a very different function, that law enforcement have a very concentrated function. So that's why we kept them separate in the report and haven't put them as a consolidated report in the program. The raw figures on the population and the budget, we try to include them in the report, not so much in the presentation. And then in terms of the oversight, I think that this is an issue that we have to look at. We have to engage legal services because the Constitution doesn't give the province oversight over law enforcement. And therefore, the legislation doesn't give oversight, or the police. Actually, the IPID doesn't have oversight over law enforcement. So this is something that we've really got to develop within the Municipal Systems Act or something like that. I think we have collectively addressed most of the questions.
Can I just check whether any of the other team members would like to add? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to add a comment on impact, I think it's really the most important question that was asked of all the valuable input. We're always striving to, work towards impact. But what we need to do and what we acknowledge is we need to improve our data tracking and our monitoring mechanisms so that we can lead to those outcomes and those impacts, and actually to be able to measure them successfully so that we can move forward with this. It is a process. We're working very much with our being data-led and evidence-driven, but it is something, a work in progress. But please be assured that outcomes and impact are very much on our agenda for reports like this, like the policing needs and priorities, but all of the research that we do undertake as well. Thank you, Chairperson.
Chair, perhaps just one point, the success on the organised crime, there's been quite a few high-profile cases in the courts, I think that all of us are aware of. So there's a lot of work, but that also creates undercurrents. So when the leaders are being taken out of the community, there's a fight to succeed that specific gang lord or the head. And then lastly, Member Boyson, the SAPS Canaan unit, we'll follow up on that. I know that if asked that we need to follow up on the SAPS, and the municipality of National does not have a Canaan unit. We'll follow up on that. I've made a note.
No, maybe, not that I'm trying to summarize your presentation, but maybe to summarize what I sense is the need in the committee. In order to have a needs and priorities conversation, we need a couple of layers in terms of the matrix that we look at. We need the impact side of things, and we need the comparative. Obviously, there's different roles, different mandates. This is looking at the municipal side of it, but in order to inform the rest of the process, as I understand it, ultimately you want to engage with the SAPS, you want to engage with where priorities lie, that comparative aspect, that impact aspect, comparative between the different forms of law enforcement, what each of their contributions are, what the impact is. I think the transversal element, especially in a committee like this. Remember, Gwensu made the point where it's not just about boots on the ground. And I think you also made a similar point there. It's actually it's one part of the entire community safety environment that you want to create. And for us to engage as a committee, going to use a possibly intimidating example, but I don't know whether you're familiar with the IRR survey that they annually produce, the South African survey. What you actually need is I don't want to say like a booklet with different aspects of data that we can compare with one another. I think that would be incredibly useful. And again, this is useful, but we politicians, we saw something good, so we want something even better. Colleagues, another round of questions. Let me start on that side. Member Gwensu, Member Kasim, you covered? Okay, let's start there.
No, thank you very much. They're not necessarily substantive questions, and I think you attempted to cover some, acknowledge some, and also deferred some for future study research. That's a problem with research work on researchers. Now, no, I think you did not respond to this question. It was posed here, and I want to argue the point that for me, Chair, the study doesn't necessarily have an overemphasis on the metro, but there's dominance on the metro, and that dominance is as a result of the population size of the metro, right? And the rate of crime. The size of our population, it is in the study, is about 53%. And in respect to the metro's contribution to crime is about 79%. And therefore, that in itself warrants that focus. Not over concentration, but that concentration. For me, it's a fair concentration, right? And if you look at the study and say, district contributes about 21% in respect to matters in this instance. So, and I think for me it's a relatively balanced focus. you made a statement to say both the Provincial Commissioner and City of Cape Town, they have responded to your research. But unfortunately, you're not sharing their response with us. I suggest that we share that on the basis that we ought to have an appreciation of what their responses are, given the fact that this research seeks to inform their priorities as well. And as this committee, we ought to have a side of what is their response entails. So I suggest that you furnish us with the contents of their responses in respect to the outcomes of your research. Yes, I know there are various stages this report still must go to. I don't think that you may safely say also for future studies, but one is deeply interested on the number of law enforcement officers who left the system, either dismissed or what have you, and where are they? At the level of the South African Police Service and law enforcement. And where the impact of those, particularly others than lip service. I'm making this point here because particular example. There was a year when I was driving to the Eastern Cape and I gave a gentleman a lift. I became comfortable to a point that of asking him to drive for me, and he drove quite comfortable. I remember when he almost hit the kudu between Beaufort West and, between the Craft Reinet and Craydog. But he was able to escape nicely, and I asked, okay. And in the course of conversation, given the confidence I had, he informed me that, no, he once worked for the Metropolis then. And is one of those who were dismissed, those police officers who were on strike the other year were dismissed, right? Because he was exposed in advanced driving. If it was me driving, I could have hit that kudu. Now, later he became confident and was able to say, to inform me about his unlawful activities, criminal activities in this instance. Nice red chap, right? So that is why that's a rationale for me to pose this question about where are the former law enforcement officers? At the national level, I want to ask the question, where are the former employees of the intelligence? So I think your study should also focus on that, given the rate of crime and the sophistication of the underworld in this instance. They've become more sophisticated. I want to argue, even more than all law enforcement agencies combined. You know, so those are follow-up issues which I wanted to elevate and raise, you know, and otherwise the study for me, it would help a great deal. And you made a very good point to say, Amanda, that you were deliberate to make it a descriptive study as it seeks to inform. But again, I still want to argue, I don't necessarily see fundamentally unique findings emerging out of the study. I don't necessarily see that. But of course, as we engage and do further readings of the study, maybe I'll pick up that. You know, thank you very much. And maybe, you take that as a challenge and not a destructive critique or dismissing the report. By the way, I commended the report, despite its damning or glaring gaps in this instance. You know, particularly on the inability. You described here are the resources, but you could not be able to say, combined with the SAPs, this is what these resources will mean to us in the fight against crime. Thank you very much.
Member Kasim.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I've noted the responses on gang violence. I just wanted to check. The report speaks to a lack of funding, a lack of resources. I just wanted to check, what is the department doing wrong that the community is doing differently? Because if we look at organizations like Pagat and G-Force, they do live broadcasts every Sunday. What are they doing right that you can't do? without resources, without funding. A community goes out with these organizations every Sunday. Drug loads are taken from their premises. Drugs are taken from those premises as well. So how is it that the community and organizations like Packet and G-Force can go every Sunday and remove drug loads from their homes with drugs and stuff that are killing children in our communities, but the police in this province can't do it, law enforcement can't do it. So what exactly is this province and the different structures doing to work hand in hand with these organizations? Because if they can do it within a minute with the information that has been presented to this province, why can the province not do that every week as well? And then secondly, I just wanted to, with regards to the response and law enforcement, why are so many police members, even retired police members, being moved over to law enforcement and being placed into senior management positions, but law enforcement individuals who have been there for years with the relevant experience are overlooked? If you can just give clarity on that as well. And then also in terms of evictions, I just wanted to get clarity. What is the amount of law enforcement deployed to the evictions department? Because if we look at the crime that is increasing in our communities as well, homeless people are putting up structures. And then we look at traders as well, putting structures up in the different communities. Law enforcement comes and removes them from these homes, from those structures and those traders and the goods as well. They're back on the street committing crime, stealing because they're trying to make a living. So does this province think that they're part of the problem here by removing these people from these structures and placing them back on the streets and removing the goods as well? What are you doing differently to ensure that, what are you doing differently this year to ensure that that doesn't increase? Thank you.
Any other hands? Member van Manen.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to confine myself very much to the report before us today. Just a couple of follow-ups, and then I want to ask what the key findings. So I understand that this is largely a descriptive survey, and I understand that. I'm just concerned how it can meet the objectives that are stated if it doesn't include SAPS cluster information, because it's essentially very much a very small portion of the picture. So policing needs and priorities, by definition, would need to include SAPS capacities as well. And I'm deeply concerned that we're just simply not going to get a complete picture of what those are and what needs to be done if we don't have the lead agency's information on that. I understand there are political and jurisdictional issues between provincial and national policing. I mean, it's been aired for the last 15 years, but I don't think that one can just have part of the picture and think that that's going to give one the whole landscape. It really is a concern. It also talks to things like arrest rates, to fines, to roadblocks, to policing operations in general. There's no statistical information on that, so we don't really get much idea of what is actually happening out there. So that's really one concern. And I think when it comes to methodology, that really is something that concerns me deeply. I'm also now getting two different strands of information on the four that didn't participate, or maybe they did participate, maybe some participated on certain issues. We need to have a clear answer as to whether or not they did or didn't participate in the study, and are there, if municipalities don't participate, sorry, is there any way to essentially compel them to participate, or are the ramifications of not participating? That comes directly into the issue of traffic. I'm also concerned when it comes to issues of traffic, which I think are probably the ultimate example of transversal operations. There's not that much information on the provincial department on mobility. There's also no mention of the traffic management system in Cape Town with the cameras, the buildings in Goodwood, and how that also is related provincially, because certainly when it comes to traffic, it is restricted to traffic related crime, but an enormous amount of crime, from drugs to poaching to all sorts of things, human trafficking, can very much be apprehended by having a solid traffic department across the entire province. So I'd really like to get some information on that. I'm not going to unpack the issue of the murder precincts here, moving from 13 to 6, because I don't think it really falls within the scope of this particular study. But what I am interested in is issues about, it's good and well to have lists of vehicles, of numbers, but there's no information regarding shifts, regarding what is deployed per shift, how many vehicles per shift, so one actually gets the genuine idea of how many cars, for example, are out on the streets, how many officers are out on the streets. So, staffing levels in vehicles and capacity is directly related to the issue of shifts, as well as overtime. I understand that is a concern everywhere across the province, but it really also only seems that Cape Town is the one running a 24-hour service. Training is of vital importance. So information on that would be good. Then in terms of oversight, so I did sit on CIVOC for a while. CIVOC oversight is extremely useful, but it's only as useful as the capacity of that CIVOC. One doesn't want to end up with an organization in X municipality that doesn't actually understand what its oversight role is. And so it starts unpacking every single time. Officers have to take decisions on the ground regarding operations. So one has to be careful that they don't become essentially a brake on the abilities of officers to do their job, but in fact are restricted to oversight and to appropriate oversight. But that said, as it stands at the moment, CPFs don't oversight municipal policing or law enforcement. CIVOC doesn't have oversight of those. And I think there is also an argument to be made that whereas neighbourhood watches are certainly force multipliers, there are numerous cases of neighbourhood watches operating outside of their mandate, operating armed, operating in ways that are perhaps not entirely aligned, shall we say, with proper policing procedures. So how can one start looking at oversight of municipal policing structures as well potentially as neighbourhood watches in a way that is appropriate and that can actually add value? And then lastly, with law enforcement. Law enforcement in many ways could be argued is quite different to policing. It relates largely, if not entirely, to bylaw and bylaw enforcement. Now, if you look at Cape Town, it has a plethora of bylaws. And in fact, over the years, there's been a huge attempt to streamline those bylaws and to make them fit for purpose. I am not entirely sure that is necessarily the case in every smaller municipality across the province, and is work being directed to that to ensure that you actually have a matching up of law enforcement and what law enforcement is supposed to do to be fit for purpose in those jurisdictions. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Over to you, HOD.
Thanks, Chair. I once again see with the team. So the dominance of the Metro member, Provincial, and then police commissioners. The response, I'll leave that to you, Amanda.
Over to you.
No, apologies, acting as I made this point earlier in respect to how you framed the aspect about the South African police services. Are you able to give us the background in respect to the municipality's law enforcement? Because you gave a breakdown of those who are employed under the SAPS Act and those who are employed under the Public Service Act, right? Separately and combined. But it's not the case with the law enforcement agency in municipality police, So one is deeply interested on that background as well, and also the gaps in terms of the staffing, So because this gives one a sense, of the state of affairs in concrete terms. There is this issue about, okay, let me leave it. It's a political question. It's not for you. I think that this one's a statement. I think the advantage with municipalities is that when they want to take a decision, even an appointment on substantive matters, they convene a council. But SAPs, they make submissions. Even to employ a cleaner, they make submissions. So I think it's important to elevate that as a strategic question in this instance, which constrain SAPs, and here's the advantage for municipality in this instance, but to what extent are they using that? And given the fact that they have different streams of income, thanks, or revenue generation.
Right. That was the last question. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So Provincial, once again, I want to refer to page number 30, where we speak about the total full traffic services post in total full metro and the total population. That is the one where I said we now need to bring in the SAPs, that one, the other table that we have pertaining to the deployment of the SAPs officials and how they are deployed. So and to break it down, also per municipality. So I do get your point, and I've made a note that that is one of the amendments that we will be making. So you're interested in the law enforcement officers and the SAPS officers who have left the service, and our studies would focus on that. You will understand that will be an immensely time-consuming, complicated study that we cannot build into this. But we do take your point that we should have a look at what's happening. But it cannot be part of this study because it will really detract from what we are trying to do. But I get your point, and I do understand where you're going with that specific question. Member Kasim, how is it possible that Pagat can go to and get people out of the house? I do think it's outside of the scope of this specific report, and I really don't think I can respond to that question, and I do not know the methodologies that Pagat apply and the governance process that they apply, because without understanding the governance process and the structures and the reporting process and the decision-making process, I cannot tell you how they can do it and why we cannot do it. All I can tell you is how the SAPs can operate and how our complaint is and how they do the investigations. And once they do that, they go in there. I cannot respond to that question, unfortunately. Why are there so many retired police officers that's being employed in law enforcement? Once again, outside of the scope of this one, but it also links to Member Quincy's question in terms of the leap of the officers that have left the employ. And that's once again something, as I said, outside of the scope. And I do think that one cannot prescribe to, for example, a City of Cape Town that you cannot take a retired law enforcement or SAPS official, or the Western Cape government. You cannot appoint a retired police officer if he's still under 65 and he wants to join Western Cape government. The number of convictions, are we part of the problem? Once again, outside of the scope of this session, and I'd like to respond to that in terms of how that, but those are specifics in terms of the actions and processes rather than the capacity, the scope of this chairperson. Member van Minden, how can we achieve the study objectives if we do not include the SAPS class information? Fair question. We'll go back and we'll have a discussion on that and see how we can incorporate that specific information. There's no statistical information on the operations such as roadblocks, etc. And once again, it links to the point that Chairperson made earlier in terms of the context. Understand the context, because we're giving capacity and the capabilities, but not the context. So you cannot see whether it's adequate or not adequate. So we'll go back, and you do not have to be concerned. You can just say, I recommend that you include that. I know that you said you're deeply concerned, but I know the logic in that comment. The municipalities who did not participate, you had conflicting stories. Amanda, I'll allow you to respond to that. And no mention of the traffic management system. I note that, and we'll once again go back. No information of the vehicle officers per shift. I know we covered the officers per shift, and we covered the ratio of vehicles in the document. And that the CPF does not have oversight over municipal law enforcement, and the neighborhood watch operate outside of any oversight. And once again, I do think we have that opportunity when we review the Western Cape Community Safety Act, that we have the opportunity to build that into the Act. So if the Constitution is silent and any other Act is silent, we can, and there's a gap, then we can fill that gap with bringing that into the legislation. And how can we have, okay, the neighborhood watch, see what is being done to match the law enforcement and to have standardization. I think that links to my point that I've made earlier, where we're working with the Institute for Municipal Public Safety and then also with SALGA and the various municipalities to start standardizing. And you specifically went to the bylaws. So it's no use standardizing in terms of the operations, but the bylaws are different. They need to apply. So I need to know the bylaws if I'm in Saldanha and I want to into law enforcement in Burke River. I need to know the bylaws of Burke River before I can do that. So perhaps something that we've not looked at in that space, in the IMS, and that's on part of the program. But I'll take it back to the executive committee there and ask them that is something that we need to look at. How do we standardize so that we do not have different bylaws that can be enforced in the one and not in the other one? Chair, can I just check with Amanda, anything that you'd like to add, Amanda?
No, thank you. Certainly, I think that in regard to the 4 municipalities, I think it's correct in the report. It's probably the way that I presented it in the presentation, but I'll go back to the report and check that again. So thank you to Mr. Mfanta for clarifying that. In terms of the oversight issue, just to remind the committee that you would have oversight over the police and the Metro Police, because the Metro Police fall within the South African Police Service Act. And so some of those questions around evictions and specific deployments by the City of Cape Town would fall within your mandate to ask questions around that. The Civic Committee guaranteed it doesn't have a legal mandate of any of the other committees, and it's not an investigative committee. But from I understand, it's one of the most thorough committees in the sense that it does interrogate actions in a detailed manner. I think the point being really is that there is nothing that of a similar nature happening in the municipalities, and that is an area for concern, because there is a big gap there. Thank you, and I think we will look at many of the other comments that you made.
Right, colleagues, I'm going to allow a last question. We also need to get to our own committee business, our own discussion. Member Boyson?
Chairperson, I might be out of order, but I'm going to take the gap, and you can make the call. Through you, Chairperson, the position Mr. Arons is acting in, what is the latest on that?
You are indeed out of order. But can I suggest, because we are going to take a break, we also have to accommodate a personal situation that has arisen. Can I suggest you take it up? If you're not satisfied with the answer, we'll do a question to the ministry. But yeah, it's out of order, but if you want to respond, it's fine.
A brief response, Chairperson. The post is still vacant. I'm acting until the end of March. It has been advertised last year, November. The interviews should happen shortly, and hopefully there'll be a successful candidate, and then they'll appoint Chairperson. So this is still vacant, and I'm be acting until the end of March. I have committed to the Premier I'll act until we find a suitable candidate, but for now, those interviews have not happened.
I think Member Boyson is interested.
I have not applied, sir. I have not applied.
Colleagues, we're going to take, let's make it a 15-minute break. And then we'll also accommodate your situation. And then we'll come back to discuss, have our own discussion about the presentation, and then we'll have feedback on the library bill. So thank you very much. It was a good engagement. I hope that you also took something from the committee that will assist you. Thanks.
Chair, thanks so much to the members. As I said, quite a lot of high-grade questions, quite a lot of interesting questions, but I have committed to following up on a few things, but thanks to the team also for the report. It is a lot of work, and a lot of work done, but it's not perfect, and we value the inputs, and we'll go back and just review. Thanks so much.
Okay, colleagues, we can start the meeting. Yeah, no, they need to be on time. Yeah, you can. I think just in terms of the report that we just received, if we can look at recommendations and resolutions from our side. Then after that, I think your item won't take too much time. So, Member van Manen?
I don't want to be overly critical of the department, but I do feel that if you try to align the objectives of a PNP research program with the substantive work here, I feel that the report, whereas it's very important, is not yet a complete picture. And I would like to bring a recommendation from the committee that we recommend that before the PNP is finalized, that they also bring in the SAPS cluster information, as well as ensuring they have the comprehensive information on the provincial traffic from mobility. Because, to be quite honest, it was going to try to determine priorities and needs. One does need a fuller picture. And I feel that great that they've done this work on municipalities, but it is only part of the picture. I'm not sure how you're going to word that, but I think something along those lines.
All right. Any other recommendations?
Let me just try on that point.
Your hand was up first, Member Gwentsu.
My hand is permanently up.
Oh, it's permanently up. And then
I want to write on the point she made that the study is fairly good given the objective. Policing needs and priorities. Policing, not police. Now, they know the policing needs at the level of municipalities. And certainly, they're not substantive different from the policing needs at the level of the police in respect to resource and capacity. Now, if they were to attempt to synthesize the state of the two, that will help a great deal to inform the province and the country in respect to what are the needs and where the concentration should be in the Western Cape, spread it down to the level of local district and local municipalities. You know, it will better inform the strategy in this instance. That's the point I wanted to add. Thanks.
Now, colleagues, also the financial, now I know it's across various levels of government, it's not a simple exercise, but to have a sense of expenditure and what it is for as part of the report as well. How much resources are being put in by a municipality, for what purpose, how much resources are put in by the province, by the national government. I think a breakdown like that for me would also be useful. I see, Member Stevens, you were sort of looking hesitant, but I wasn't sure whether your hand is up.
Also, I wasn't quite happy with the answer Member van Manen got on the neighborhood watches. I want to know, how is the province supporting the neighborhood watches in the community policing forums? How are they going to support it?
So perhaps also bringing in the impact and resourcing of neighborhood watches, CPFs, into the equation as well. Member Wessels?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I don't know how specific we need to be in terms of the financials and what the extra detail is that we need to put in our recommendation here. But I think the 24/7 service and I think the local municipalities should have a plan on how they intend of getting to that point. I think it's crucial. I think community safety is the heart and soul of a local economy. I think it's important that we understand the organograms of local authorities and understand the vacancy rates as opposed to the total organogram, because I think that to a large extent measure the priorities on how the municipality sees it. Then I also think it would be a very interesting, the local authorities in terms of the fines and the collection rate of the fines, and see what one can, if one cannot use that as a active measure to start building out on these portfolios. And then for me there was one sentence that was for me fairly disturbing, and that was that law enforcement is a very under-researched function. Now, I mean, if that was a sentence, then that is a critical something that we need to do, and get into this report and getting in talks with SALGA, get alignment between bylaws of various sizes of municipalities, in order for there to be clear-cut regulation on what is needed and demanded from a law enforcement and traffic department in the municipalities. Thanks.
Member Van Manen.
I think maybe if I could sneak it in here, because I don't know if it's strictly speaking part of our mandate, but when it comes to bylaws, to recommend that both IMPS and SALGA look at a comprehensive program on updating bylaws to be fit for purpose. I don't think one should just blanketly say they should all be standardized. I think it depends from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But I think we certainly should be encouraging IMPS and SALGA to do work towards bylaws, because bylaws can be extremely important. And I think sometimes they fall by the wayside. It's not just building lines and fence heights. I mean, if you look at the city of Cape Town, when they have, for example, a very good bylaw on problem buildings, on who needs to do what to ameliorate the situation. So I would really recommend that we need to have emphasis placed on the importance of bylaws. Thanks.
No, just on that, if it doesn't fall within this committee, then we can certainly refer that to the committee, to the relevant committee, local government committee. So I think we should have it as a recommendation. Where it goes might be a bit, take a little bit of thinking. But either way, let's get that in. Member Kasim.
Thank you, Chairperson. No, mine is just a request if we could get an updated report on how many drug houses have been shut in the Western Cape. I know that we got one earlier last year, but I'd just like to see how many has been shut since then. And then also he said he was going to give a detailed report as to how they do things in terms when a drug house is reported, how long does it take, and the different processes. And then also, okay, no, that's all for now. Thank you, Chairperson.
That would be a question from the committee to them to follow up for. Sorry,
Chairperson, I just remembered now. Also, if it is possible, if we could get like a breakdown as to how the money that was taken from health and education and diverted to the specific department, how was it? If there's a breakdown report, maybe on how it was spent.
Okay, so there's two requests for information that's then part of our recommendations there. Member Boyson.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, also for the standing committee to be provided with the signed MOU, the content.
Yes.
Well, that was going to be my input as well around that, but let's put that as a question for a request for information that we will process. I have a specific recommendation there that I want to come up with. You have Member Gwensu, did I see a hand there?
No, thank you very much. 3 points to make. One, that there has to be an impact assessment of the technology we use, which has been deployed across. And I think you hear them that they were unable to respond to that question, to understand the value, and call for further investment technology, so that we embrace or dismiss based on informed position on ongoing assessment. That's the first point. The second point, given that the province has constitutional mandate which extend oversight over municipalities, that the committee should also be able to invite the municipality law enforcement to account on certain aspects. The last point relates to the need to recommend that the IP scope should be extended to cover municipalities in this instance, as a basis to base our uniformity. And also, I think it would be important, given the cooperation agreement currently underway, for effective and efficient oversight role. And the point was made here to say municipalities do not have an oversight body over the conduct over their conduct, only in the city of Cape Town, but also within the city of Cape Town, it has its own limitations. Thanks, sir.
Okay, I don't necessarily agree personally with the extension of the inspectorate. I do agree with the principle of oversight, that there should be oversight mechanism with municipalities and that we should explore it. And in terms of where our oversight role with municipalities and where it ends and stops, that's a matter for legal advice. We entertain it based on what our legal mandate is. Do you have an input in that regard?
Yes, Chair. I just want to advise the committee in terms of oversight over municipalities. I've heard members saying that. I just want to say to the committee, the legislature doesn't have oversight over municipalities. Our oversight is over the Department of Local Government and the Minister of Local Government. We've had legal opinion on this, and we really don't have. But we do call municipalities to come, but it's difficult when they refuse, because legally we don't have.
Yeah, look, I think it also depends on the applicable legislation, but what I look, there is a mechanism where we can apply it. If there's a request for a municipality, we look at what the law says, we get a legal opinion. If we can do it, we can do it. If we can't do it, we can't do it. Either way, I think the principle, and this is where from my side, I would like to meet member going to halfway, that the oversight over law enforcement entities and municipality and what that oversight is, something that we need to get a report on. And I'm going to tie it with both those items with, in fact, my recommendation, the memorandum of understanding, and we previously discussed this in this committee. I think we need to get comprehensive feedback, not just in terms of the content. I think what Member Boyson proposed will give us good homework to do before such an interaction, but we need to get proper feedback. And in that feedback, we can even as a committee caucus beforehand. But there's a couple of questions I would like to have. And first of all, how does it relate to we want it obviously extended to other municipalities as well. It's not just a simple exercise of extending it, but there's surely cooperation across the various tiers of government is something that we can ask for feedback to, that would be within our mandate as well. Issues like the oversight that was raised, and I think those are some of the issues that needs to be raised in that regard. And frankly, we need to see whether it's, the accomplishment was the signing of the memorandum, or whether there's a concrete impact and progress taking place. So I would like to suggest that we as a committee also, in our oversight program, that we get a full presentation on the memorandum of understanding, that we can engage with it, where many of these issues that we are raising, I think, become very relevant.
No, we've been advised that there's a legal advice on this question. Can we then be furnished with that legal advice, a copy of that legal advice, in respect to our interest to calling relevant municipality divisions or component?
That's a reasonable request?
Yes, Chair, I think we can find that. I think, but I must also mention to the committee that the Constitution and our rules allows any committee to call anybody to appear before our committee. But the question I was addressing is the question of oversight over municipalities. But the Constitution of the country and our rules, they say that any of our committees can call anybody to appear before it. It's just become tricky when you have recommendations and stuff, but we will find the legal opinion.
I think the issue is who can you compel? That's who's obliged to come. I think that's where the grey area for me lies.
Yeah, as I indicated before, from our side, from procedural side, the committee and the legislature has oversight over the minister, the provincial minister of local government, and the provincial department of local government. Then, but I know that municipalities have legal obligation over the legislature. They have to submit certain documents to the legislature, but that doesn't really include oversight, especially when it comes to recommendations and resolutions. It's difficult, especially when the municipalities are not eager to come.
Nevertheless, I think Member Quincy's request, let's make it a committee request that we are furnished with that opinion, and then we can take it from there. But colleagues, at the end of the day, we might have differing views, but there is a mechanism that resolves it either way. Any other recommendations? Right, let's then. Colleagues, I'm sure I nearly want to say this report, it was useful, but also what was useful to me is what's not in the report. And that helps our thinking. And again, I think there were excellent contributions from all of the members there. Now, the next item on the agenda is a progress report on the library bill. I got some feedback myself, but if you can perhaps just give us feedback as to where it is, and I think the real discussion would be around the public participation that we will need to do as a committee around that. But if you can perhaps just give us input in that regard, Mr. Zaza.
Thank you, Chair. Just once again to introduce myself, my name is Ben Taza. I'm the Senior Procedural Officer for the Steering Committee. Next to me is Lisa Del Kama. She's the researcher for the whole Cluster A committee. The Western Cape Public Library Services Bill was introduced on the 22nd of January 2025, and the bill was referred to the committee on the 30th of January. And then after that, we had to engage in the process of proofreading the bill. And then after we have proofread the bill, it was published in the Government Gazette on the 13th of February 2025, and then the due date for the publication is on the 14th of March. Then, according to our rules, the committee may not deal with the bill before the expiry of 21 days. So then after 21 days, we will advise the committee to invite the Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport to brief the committee on the contents of the bill. Thereafter, the committee then will be expected to discuss its program of the bill. The program includes its public participation process, how it's going to consult the public. It's required by the law that there must be public participation process on legislation. And then after that, then the committee will formally consider the bill and pass the bill and propose any amendments, and then the bill can be finalized. But that can only happen after the 14th of March, after the expiry of 21 days. Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, any questions in that regard? My proposal, but I also think we do have a bit of leeway to finalize this, is that we look at a public hearing in the Southern Cape. We look at a public hearing down the western side of the West Coast area, and we look at a public hearing in Cape Town as a starting point. Is that the kind of, am I on the right track, Mr. Daz, or am I making a mistake there?
No, and on condition, Chairperson, members are aware of the concerns of the cause. Your decision whether or where to hold public hearings is based on what you would have been informed by the department about the cause. So we would advise the committee, even if in principle they agree to some sort of helping, but to wait until the department has thoroughly briefed the committee and the committee has satisfied itself that it understands what the bill is about. When you are briefed, you may find that the bill doesn't really affect a lot of people. It might just be an issue between government departments and two spheres of government, which is the province and the municipalities. Is it necessary to go all out, for instance, you know? So the committee, after being briefed, then it can decide. But sometimes if members have read the bill, because the bill has been distributed, the committee can have an in-principle decision on how it's going to conduct its public. But the advertising on newspapers is sort of mandated. Then other forms can, the committee, it's the responsibility is up to the committee how it conducts its public participation. But we would advise it be done, it would be confirmed after the briefing.
Yeah, so colleagues, so there's a suggestion, but as I said, we don't have to actually decide on it now. We need that info. That's the voice of experience coming in there. But in the meantime, let us prepare ourselves for a fairly intensive exercise. As you will recall, this is a urgent bill. About half of the libraries in the Western Cape is affected, and I think it's the one thing we can do something very good. Member Kasim?
Sorry, Chairperson, I haven't read the bill yet, so is it possible to get a copy of the bill?
As gazetted, is it possible to have it circulated? Great. Now we can prepare ourselves beforehand. Member Gangster?
I suggest that we sustain the advice from the senior procedural officer in sense of us stretching our head and decide on areas to visit. Yet we are not aware about the content of the bill itself. Thanks.
I think the voice of reason has prevailed. Colleagues, but keep in mind, that's on our agenda, it's urgent, so let's keep an eye out. And Member Kasim, thanks for the willingness to do the homework early on. That's exactly what I think we all should be doing. Right, then in terms of oversight, our own oversight program. Now, colleagues, you will recall last year what we did. We said we want to have as much as possible, again with the west-south metro breakdown that I alluded to earlier, we want to investigate police precincts, and we also, where possible, also link it up with sport facilities. Now, we are facing a bit of a bottleneck at the moment with SONA coming up, SOPA coming up, sorry, past life there. Again, what I'm going to ask for, and if we can again do the same exercise that we did last week, if there's any suggestions, if you can forward it to me. There is a member van Minnen brought it to my attention. It's still in the metro, but it's different from the Khayelitsha visit that we did. There is essentially, from what I understand, it is a house that is used as a satellite station in an informal settlement where there is, where I think it would be worth for us to also delve into that particular set of circumstances. So there's a proposal in that regard, and that's something we can probably, won't be logistically too difficult to get out of the way as well. Member Gwensu?
Chair, the committee will correct me if I'm wrong. You are introducing this subject as if we are going to discuss it for the first time. If my memory serves me well, sometime last year, we had a conversation about areas to prioritize and content thereof. Now, and all of us, we agreed on submissions, which for me, those submissions or the areas we identified would potentially cover for this year. Therefore, one would expect the chair, working with the procedural officer, to revisit that and develop what could be termed as a draft plan, and we interact with it, than us brainstorming once again on the matter which we've already discussed, including made our own substantive submissions. So I don't think it's worth entertaining it now till we're presented with a draft informed by our submissions. Thanks.
I think that's a valid point of order in a sense that you are raising, and perhaps the way I presented it has also created the confusion. I'm not suggesting we change what we decided already. What I am suggesting is if there's any other proposals, if we need to come up with a plan, we need to bring it here. Think about it as another opportunity for anyone that wants something included in a draft program. That is what I meant. But I absolutely agree with you. The oversight plan, please, if you have inputs to make in that regard, because I did receive some, please send it to me. And then I think Member Glensu also proposed a way to just conclude the matter. So that would be in a following portfolio committee. First item on the agenda would be oversight, the draft oversight plan for the year. Does that make sense? Yes, sir. Okay, but either way, I understand why there was a bit of confusion in terms of what I expressed myself. But that's so draft plan as you suggested, and any other inputs more than welcome. Member Kasim?
Sorry, Chairperson, if you can just slide up to the drug and gang section. If I remember correctly, we agreed that we're going to do a physical visit and a content-driven meeting, and not just a content-driven meeting, because it currently just says content-driven. Further down, it's at the end. There. It should have been physical and content-driven.
I think it was actually, at the time, the proposal was content-driven, but I have personally no problem if we also want to work that as part of our oversight, the actual physical visit that we work it in.
Yeah, I don't think we discussed we were going to.
Yeah, I think we might have spoken past one another, but colleagues, I don't have any difficulty with this as the kind of addition that I was referring to. So anything like any inputs like this, please let us then know before we bring the draft to the committee. Does that make sense? Yes, sir. All right. Let me just check there. Well, are there any minutes of previous meetings that we need to deal with? I didn't think so. Then, colleagues, the meeting is at an end. Thank you very, very much for a good engagement.